Let me start by saying how happy I am to be here with you in this beautiful city of Albury for the 2026 Aquinas Academy. Certainly the papers so far have been both informative and engaging. I will try my best to maintain the high standard that has been set by our previous speakers. The title of my paper is, of course, Dr. Austin Woodbury and the Quinque Viae of St. Thomas Aquinas. I'm confident that most of you will know something about St. Thomas Aquinas, that he was a great saint, the greatest philosopher theologian who has ever lived, the universal doctor of the church, esteemed and praised by numerous popes, the glory of the Dominican order, and so on and so forth. Quinque Viae is, of course, Latin for the five ways, the five proofs St. Thomas gave for demonstrating the existence of God. For reasons we will see later, St. Thomas was careful to call his arguments for the existence of God ways rather than proofs. But who is this Dr. Austin Woodbury? And what does he have to do with St. Thomas and his five ways? I'm indebted to Dr. Don Boland, our esteemed presenter of the previous session, for his concise treatment of the life and work of Dr. Woodbury, which is on the table over there. I can recommend it highly, by the way. The doc, as he was affectionately known by his students, was a Marist of considerable intellect, who as a young priest was sent to Rome to study at the Angelicum under Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange between the two world wars. The Angelicum is, of course, the Dominican Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, who is the angelic doctor, both for his purity and the keenness of his intellect. It is related in his life that while he was imprisoned in the family castle at Roccasecca, a prostitute was introduced into his cell so as to violate his vow of chastity. St. Thomas chased her out of his cell with a red-hot poker taken from the fireplace and promptly emblazoned a cross on the door. It was said that he never afterwards experienced temptations against chastity. His knowledge was so deep that he was said to have the intellect of an angel, a man truly angelic in both the moral and the intellectual spheres. Garrigou-Lagrange taught dogmatic and spiritual theology at the Angelicum for 50 years, from 1909 to 1959. It is said that he wrote Pope Pius XII's encyclical Humani Generis, which is subtitled Concerning Some False Opinions Threatening to Undermine the Foundations of Catholic Doctrine. Like not a few, I consider him to be one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, far superior to such luminaries as von Balthasar, Conga, de Lubac, and dare I say, John Paul II and Benedict XVI. It can be seen that Dr. Woodbury was privileged to have such a great teacher as Garrigou-Lagrange, who in turn considered the doc to be his best pupil. In 1945, Dr. Woodbury established the Aquinas Academy in Sydney in order to teach the laity the philosophy and theology of St. Thomas Aquinas. After the death of the doc in 1979, the Academy moved away from the teaching of St. Thomas. This prompted three of his prize students, Mrs. Alice Nelson, Dr. John Ziegler, and Dr. Don Boland, whom we had the pleasure of listening to in the previous session, to found the Centre for Thomistic Studies. In 1984, to continue the work of the doc, it was later renamed the Centre for Catholic Studies. Unfortunately, with the passing of Mrs. Nelson and Dr. Ziegler and the serious illness of Dr. Boland, this organisation tragically no longer carries out the work it was founded to do. However, there is a small ray of hope. 3 of the students of the above named, namely Kathy Kiprasak, whom you had the pleasure of listening to last night, Mr. Daniel Union, you will have the pleasure of listening to tonight, and your current locutor, have founded the Austin Woodbury Institute to continue the work begun long ago by the doc. While we are certainly unworthy instruments, we do believe that with God's help, we can assist in keeping alive the work of Dr. Woodbury and St. Thomas Aquinas. Let us look now at the 5 ways of St. Thomas. In doing this, I will make use of the analysis of Dr. Woodbury as found in his treatise on natural theology. Why does St. Thomas call his demonstrations for God's existence ways and not proofs? The reason is that his demonstrations tell us that God does exist, but not what he is. It is true that one of the pillars of Thomism is that there is no real distinction between what God is and that he is. There is no real distinction between God's essence and his existence. We can think separately about God's existence and his essence, but there is no separation in the real. We should also note that the ways are a posteriori rather than a priori. A posteriori is Latin for from what is later, and a posteriori proof is from effect to cause. For example, we can argue from an effect the existence of the world to its cause, which is God. A priori is Latin for from what is earlier, and a priori proof is from cause to effect. For example, we can argue from a final cause, the common good of society, to an effect, the necessity of civil authority. To say the 5 ways are a posteriori is to say that they argue from effect to cause, from the creature to the creator, from what can be to what must be. The 5 ways are indeed the ways to God. They start from 5 things or facts that any of us can observe. First, things are moved or changed. Second, things cause. Third, things are contingent. That is, they come in and out of existence. Fourth, things are more or less perfect. And fifth, things are ordered to an end. They all lead to God, understood as either an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause, or a necessary being, or a being perfect by essence, or an unordered orderer. Dr. Woodbury, his natural theology text, says that the 5 ways may all be reduced to a general proof. That is, more does not come from less, or the more perfect from the less perfect. But observable things both have perfections and yet bear the symptoms of effects. Therefore, there must be a prime cause, having these perfections from himself and more perfectly. We shall now consider each of the 5 ways in detail. The first way is, of course, from movement. But movement for the philosopher is more than movement from place to place. As Dr. Woodbury points out, it is evident to our senses that there is local movement, as when a ball moves across the field. Qualitative movement, as when water becomes hot. quantitative movement, as when a plant or animal grows. And it is evident to our consciousness that there is psychic movement. That's when we pass from not knowing something to knowing it, or to knowing it more perfectly, or from not desiring something to desiring it, or to desiring it more vehemently. Our everyday language indicates this. When we talk about being moved by a piece of music, no, I don't mean rap or hip hop. I mean real music, not noise. Gregorian chant, polyphony, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Dvorak, Bruckner. You know where I'm coming from. The argument of the first way can be expressed, as Dr. Woodbury does, by saying that there is movement in the world. That is, things undergo movement. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by a second. If this second is moved to move, it must be moved by a third, which must exist in order to move. If this third is moved to move, it must be moved by a fourth, which must exist in order to move. This regress cannot go on forever, because if there is none that exists and starts a series, neither will there be any intermediary movers, nor will there be any movement. Therefore, there must be a mover which starts movements, and therefore there is a prime mover, itself unmoved. But a prime mover, itself unmoved, is God. Therefore, God exists. We can illustrate this argument with a concrete example. A stone is moved by a stick, which is moved by a hand, which is moved by an arm, which is moved by nerves, which is moved by a motor centre, which is moved by a will, which is ultimately moved by a prime mover, which we call God. This is what we call in philosophy a series of movers per se subordinated. All the things moved have to exist together. Otherwise, the stone is not moved. Outside the series, there must be a prime mover. We contrast this with a series per accidens subordinated. For example, a stick is made by a man who is begotten by his father, who is begotten by his grandfather, who is begotten by his great-grandfather, and so on, with no necessary beginning. In contrast to the previous series, the maker, his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather don't have to exist now for the stone to be moved by the stick. Two questions may arise now. The first is, can we say that man's will is both free and at the same time moved by God, at least as he is the prime mover? The solution is that God moves everything according to its nature. It's a bit like a computer and its power source. Without power, an intact computer cannot function. With us, God is the power, and our will is the computer. Of course, as with all analogies, this one limps. The second question is, in a series per accidens subordinated, like a man, his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on, does there have to be a first? Aristotle and St. Thomas say no. Doesn't that mean that the world is eternal and has no beginning? Aristotle said yes. St. Thomas said that from reason alone, one cannot determine whether the world we live in had a beginning in time or not. We only know from divine revelation that the world had a beginning and is not eternal. But how could it be possible that the world has always existed? The answer is that God always exists. and can or could keep any creature in existence for as long as he likes. The second way of St. Thomas is from efficient causality. Before we outline the argument of St. Thomas, let us look at the four causes of Aristotle in relation to St. Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. One of the causes has to be the material used in its construction. For example, the stone, wood, glass, etc. Because without them, we don't have a cathedral. We call this the material cause. But is that enough? I could order truckloads of stone and other materials from the Acme Supply Company and have them delivered to the nature strip outside my house. But do I have a cathedral? Of course not. The materials need to be arranged to form a cathedral. We call the arrangement of the materials the formal cause. The question arises, who is going to do the arranging? We need a builder and ultimately an architect to come up with a plan to enable this. We call this the efficient cause. The question arises, why is this being done? One could answer that the builder and the architect need to make a living. Ultimately, Archbishop Polding wanted the building fit for the worship and adoration of Almighty God. We call this the final cause. Hence, following Aristotle and St. Thomas, we have two intrinsic causes, the material and the formal. The material cause of something is what it is made of, or in other words, its parts. The formal cause of something is what makes it to be what it is, in other words, the whole. As we all have heard, the whole is much more than the sum of its parts. The material cause is determinable, while the formal cause is determining. A pile of bricks can be determined to be a church or a bordello, or shall I say, a Thai massage parlour. We also have two extrinsic causes, the efficient and the final cause. The efficient cause is the maker, the one who puts the form into the matter. The final cause is the end or purpose or reason why something is done. In short, the material cause answers the question, what is it made of? The formal cause, what is it? The efficient cause, who or what made it or did it? And the final cause, why was it made or done? When it comes to our world or universe, God is the formal, efficient, and final cause, the Alpha and the Omega. The world has no material cause because it was created out of nothing. Creatio ex nihilo. And nothing is not a thing. By appropriation in sacred theology, we say that God the Father, power, is the efficient cause. God the Son, wisdom, the formal cause. And God the Holy Ghost, love, the final cause. It should be noted, authentic philosophy is interested in all four causes, but especially in the final cause, why things are so. Modern empirical or experimental science is more interested in the material and efficient causes, what things are made of and who or what made them. There are notable exceptions to this. Some of us here may remember a children's science program on TV conducted by Julius Sumner Miller, Professor of Physics at City University, whose constant refrain was, why is it so? Why is a glass a half of milk? And anyway, that won't go on Cadbury's chocolate. St. Thomas's argument from efficient causality, which is the second way, can be outlined as follows. Efficient causes exist in the world which are caused to cause. Whatever is efficiently caused is caused by a second, which must exist in order to cause. If this second is similarly caused by a third, which likewise must exist in order to cause, this third is similarly caused, it is caused by a fourth, which must exist in order to cause. This regress cannot go on forever. If there is none that exists and supplies the causation of the series, causation will never be found in the series. There must exist an efficient cause, which causes or sets in motion the causation of the whole series. A prime efficient cause, itself uncaused in causing, that is God. We can illustrate this argument with virtually the same concrete example we used for the first way from movement. Namely, a stick causes a stone to move. A hand causes a stick. The arm causes the hand. The nerves cause the arm. The motor centre causes the nerves. The will causes the motor centre. And ultimately, a prime cause, which we call God, causes the will. Again, we note that when God causes the will to do something, he still respects its freedom. How this is done is of course a mystery. If we, with our created, finite intellects, find nothing mysterious in a world created by an infinite intellect, then we are not living in the real world. In comparing the first two ways, Dr. Woodbury says that the second way is taken not from the passivity or movement of things in this world, as is the first way, but from the manner of their activity, according as their activity or efficient causation is dependent or subordinate. The third way of St. Thomas is from the possible and the necessary. Let's first clarify a few terms. A contingent being is a being which, even though it is, and therefore can be, nevertheless can be not. In other words, it is possible to exist and not to exist. A necessary being is a being which cannot be not. That is, cannot not exist. We also need to distinguish between the be and the become of a thing. Or in other words, the existence and the coming into existence of a thing. For example, the builder is the cause only of the become of the house. That is, of the house becoming. The house, while it is, requires also a cause of its be. That is, of the house being. This leads us to the principle of efficient causality, which states that every contingent being, or being which not from itself is, if it is, has an efficient cause other than itself, not only of its become, but also of its be. A computer has a maker who is the cause of its become or coming into existence. It has a power source, which is the cause of its being or functioning as a computer. Following Dr. Woodbury, the third way can be expressed as follows. Contingent beings exist. Every contingent being has distinct from itself a cause, not only of its become, but also of its be. If this cause is a contingent being, also of it there is such a cause. If this cause also is contingent, also of it there must be such a cause. This regress cannot be unto infinity. Therefore there is outside the series of causes, which are contingent beings, a cause which is a necessary being. Therefore, there is a prime being, self-existent, absolutely necessary, which we call God. Let us focus on the notion of God being a self-existent being. That is, he has existence from himself and not from another. He is his existence. There is no real distinction between his essence and his existence, between what he is and that he is. Creatures, on the other hand, are not self-existent beings. They do not have existence from themselves, but from another. They are not their own existence. There is a real distinction between their essence and their existence, between what they are and that they are. The fourth way of St. Thomas is from degrees of perfection. Perfection is fullness of being. The perfect is that which has perfection, or that to which nothing is lacking. The perfections referred to in the fourth way are transcendental perfections. For example, reality, unity, truth, goodness, beauty, knowledge, wisdom, will, love, life, freedom, and so on. Not specific, generic, or material perfections, such as animality, heat, colour, shape, hardness, and so on. The main difference between transcendental and non-transcendental perfections is that transcendental perfections have no limit. For example, love is unlimited, whereas humanity is limited. In order to follow the argument of the fourth way, we need to understand the distinction between being something by essence and being something by participation. For example, between being good by essence and good by participation. To say that something is good by participation is to say that it has goodness. To say that something is good by essence is to say that not only does it have goodness, but that it is goodness itself. To say that something is good by essence is to say it is not, is to say it is most good. Something beautiful by essence is most beautiful. The argument of the fourth way proceeds from the helenological principle that diverse things, not according to themselves, are united, but there must be some one cause of their union. It follows that if there are things in diverse degrees good or true, or diverse things which are good or true, there is a being most perfect and perfect by essence, and being by essence, existing by essence. The fourth way concludes by saying that a being who is being by essence is God, because he is being from self and is his being, is his existence. Therefore, is pure act, immutable, eternal, infinite, and supremely perfect. The fifth way of St. Thomas is from the governing of things. To correctly understand this demonstration, we need to be clear about what we mean by the end of something. We here take end as that for the sake whereof something is done or is. Finality is order towards end. In the fifth way, we make use of the principle of finality, which states that every agent acts for the sake of an end. This does not mean that every agent acts with knowledge of the end. For example, the end of the arrow is to hit the target, but the arrow doesn't know this. The end of the arrow is imposed by the archer. Who does know this? It is clear that every order of finality supposes an ordering intellect, that is, an intelligent orderer. Indeed, there can be a series of intelligent orderers. Dr. Woodbury uses the example of the army chain of command to illustrate this. The army commander orders the corps commander, who orders the division commander, who orders the brigade commander, who orders the regimental commander, who orders the battalion commander, who orders the company commander, who ultimately orders the platoon commander. All the links in the chain have to exist together. Otherwise, we have no chain. In this situation, no army. It is a conglomeration of individuals. The fifth way can be expressed as follows. The action of things in the world is ordered towards an end. The action of a thing cannot be ordered towards an end without there being an ordering intellect. If this ordering intellect is not its understand, that is, unordered, it is ordered to understand by a higher ordering intellect, which must exist so as to order. If this intellect is not unordered, it also must be ordered to understand by a still higher ordering intellect, which must exist so as to order. This regress cannot be unto infinity. There must exist an orderer which causes the order of finality found in all members of the series. That is, a prime orderer itself, not ordered, a prime universal orderer, which we call God. The conclusions of each of the five ways are on the surface different. Unmoved mover, uncaused cause, necessary being, a being perfect by essence, and an unordered orderer. When we probe more deeply, they all say the same thing. There exists a being, which we call God, who is the explanation of all that exists or could exist. There are, of course, other arguments for the existence of God, besides the Quinque Viae of St. Thomas. There are four of these. The first says that essences, whether actual or possible, are beings by participation, and therefore there must exist a being by essence. The second says that because truth is immutable, there must exist a being who is truth by essence. The third says that man has a natural desire for perfect happiness. And since natural desires cannot be futile, there must exist an infinite good. The fourth says that man is conscious of moral obligation, which is a dictate of human reason, which is a participated reason, which supposes reason by essence. As Dr. Woodbury points out, these four arguments are really special cases of the fourth way of St. Thomas. Let me finish by conducting a little survey. Please raise your hand, I do mean this, for which of the five ways you find most persuasive. The first way from movement or change. Anybody? Yeah? Okay, it's a free country. Right. Good. The second way from causality. Okay. The third way from contingency. The fourth way from grades of affection. You voted twice. The fifth way from order. Okay, I think the winner was the first way, but although some people voted twice, so I've got to be careful. St. Thomas himself thought the first way was the most persuasive because the fact of change is more accessible to the senses than the other four ways. Thank you.